Welcome, esteemed listener, to The Deep Dive, coming to you live from the one and only Department of Existential Dread.
Your primary provider of belief on demand.
And we are here today because science, in its infinite wisdom, has finally decided to formally admit something huge.
The one thing it spent the most time, actively ignoring.
Is the one thing it absolutely cannot explain.
Indeed. We're unpacking a massive philosophical and scientific schism today. It all points to this monumental failure of the scientific method it's dominated physics for the last 300 years.
That's right. We are dissecting the huge shift from reductionism to complexity science. And the topic is, well, life itself. We're here because the most fundamental branch of science, the one that claims to know everything, has finally, publicly, and I have to say, quite hilariously, admitted it doesn't know what life is, or why it even exists.
They checked the rule book, they checked all particles, and they found, well, zero explicit instructions.
Right.
Nothing in there demanding the existence of organisms or consciousness or you.
Which brings us to our eternal tagline here at the department. We check the atoms, and they don't seem to care about your mortgage.
Not one bit. The universe just doesn't require you to be a thing.
But here you are.
And our mission today is to really explore how this profound realization is reshaping not just physics, but all of science. It's forcing disciplines to collaborate on what is, for the first time in centuries, a fundamentally level playing field.
Okay, so what you're saying is we're going to show everyone that the biggest answers in science might not be found in the supermassive or the microscopic.
Exactly. They're in the messy middle, in the complexity of just being alive.
And the signpost for this massive intellectual U-turn, it wasn't some new particle or new telescope. It was a controversy. A scandal, really, surrounding the most prestigious award in the entire discipline.
The Nobel scandal of October 8, 2024.
That's the one.
It was an earthquake. Particularly for the physicists who dedicate their lives to the deepest, most, reductionist layers of reality.
Right.
For context, historically, the Nobel Prize in Physics is reserved for discoveries about, cosmology or fundamental subatomic particles, the really basic building blocks.
But in 2024, the committee looked up from the quantum foam and basically said, nope.
Not this year.
We're awarding this prize for discoveries related to artificial intelligence. Specifically, the breakthroughs that led to the generalized cleverness models that are defining our world right now.
And the traditional physics community, they reacted with genuine outrage.
Oh, I bet.
Their argument was, how can you give the prize for a technological application in a complex machine when we are still searching for the most fundamental forces of nature? They saw it as, cheapening the award.
I see it differently. I see it as the most elegant public admission of defeat in modern scientific history. It was physics basically saying, look, we looked everywhere we told you was important, the tiny stuff, the massive stuff, and since we didn't find the answers about intelligence and organization there, we are now looking at the one thing we spent the last 100 years actively ignoring.
Which is organized emergent information systems.
Exactly.
And that history of dismissal is absolutely critical here. Your source material highlights that for most of the 20th century, physicists treated living systems, organisms, cells, brains with a profound intellectual arrogance.
Yeah.
They viewed them through the lens of biophysics. Complex, yes, but ultimately just molecular machines made of gooey parts.
Gooey parts. You can just hear the disdain in that, can't you?
Absolutely.
Why would I study an earthworm? I'm busy unifying gravity and quantum mechanics? When I finish my elegant theory, your little earthworm will just be a predictable, complicated byproduct.
And that was the attitude. Biologists, chemists, neuroscientists, they were tolerated, but their domains were considered secondary,
Derivative.
Derivative, exactly. The foundational question of what is life as an organizational principle separate from its chemistry, that was deemed unphysical, almost. Philosophical, not serious.
But the 2024 Nobel changed the mandate. By celebrating the complex result, the AI, rather than the simple component, a quark physics, was forced to acknowledge that the biggest mysteries of the universe aren't contained in the individual parts.
But in the massive, unpredictable systems that emerge when those parts interact.
It forced physics to look outside its own sandbox and confront its own identity crisis.
The Nobel signaled to the entire scientific world that the essential, fundamental mystery demanding investigation is unfolding right here in the macroscopic world of organisms and information.
And it's a direct challenge to the centuries-old assumption that truth can only be found by breaking things down.
Okay, let's unpack this core philosophy that's finally been, exposed as intellectually insufficient. We're talking about reductionism.
And on the surface, it sounds incredibly compelling. I mean, if you want to understand a clock, you take it apart and look at the gears.
Right. If you want to understand a chemical reaction, you look at the atoms involved. Reductionism is seductive because of its incredible historical success. It's the philosophy that dictated the whole scientific hierarchy, placing physics at the absolute pinnacle, the most fundamental science.
The king of the science.
The fundamental belief is that all scientific laws, from, why the economy crashes to why we fall in love, must eventually be reducible to the most basic particles and laws governing space-time, energy, and matter.
It's basically an intellectual pyramid scheme where physics collects all the dues at the top, telling biology, you're just particle mechanics wrapped in protein.
Right. And we have to acknowledge this framework was immensely fruitful. It really was.
Oh, for sure.
It powered the Newtonian revolution, the discovery of fundamental forces, quantum mechanics, the construction of all modern electronics. For centuries, simplifying a physical system into manageable, predictable components delivered tangible, powerful results.
But its application to things like life. It can be ruthlessly stupid. This is what I call the toddler method.
The toddler method. Okay, tell me more about this methodology.
Okay, so the universe is a beautiful, intricate vase. And that vase is life.
Yeah.
It holds water, it has a function, it has aesthetic properties.
Mm-hmm.
The reductionist physicist, our toddler, wants to know where the beauty is hiding. So what does the toddler do?
They smash it.
They smash the vase into a million tiny shards, the atoms, the quarks, the fundamental exponents. And then the toddler looks at the shards, Brickell ceramic, and says, I have now perfectly analyzed the mass, velocity, and composition of every single piece of broken ceramic. Where's the beauty? Where's the function, the vaseness? It must be here somewhere.
But it's not.
Of course not. The beauty was in the arrangement, the cohesion, the systemic properties that only existed when the parts were interacting harmoniously.
So the key takeaway is that by reducing the system down to its most basic, non-interacting components, you lose the very essence of the system.
You lose the plot entirely.
You can catalog every particle, but you fundamentally failed to understand the living process or the organizational pattern. And that failure, that inability for the parts to explain the complex whole, that's what's forcing this intellectual revolution.
The most important properties of the universe reside in the relationships, not just the components.
And the failure of reductionism becomes starkly apparent when you look at the yield, or maybe the lack thereof, in the most reductionist branches of physics over the last, several decades.
Yeah.
The entire field was obsessed with finding the single, final, most fundamental layer of reality, the soul particle that unlocks everything.
The magic bullet. And they got so close, and then they just hit this metaphysical wall of more math required.
Precisely. We have to be specific here. The source material points to the stagnation surrounding the long-promised theories of everything. These were the ultimate reductionist projects.
Like string theory.
Most famously, string theory, yes. It promised to unify the large gravity relativity with the small quantum mechanics. The goal was one single, elegant equation that described everything in the universe.
And for decades, the intellectual heavy hitters poured all their energy into this quest. What did they find instead of the ultimate equation?
They found beautiful, abstract mathematics, but they hit several fatal, practical roadblocks. The first and biggest was the lack of testability.
Right.
These theories often require conditions like energies far beyond anything we can generate on Earth, or the existence of untestable extra dimensions that make empirical validation just impossible.
So we have a theory that describes the universe, but we can't actually prove the universe uses that theory. It's a gorgeous philosophical construct, but it's not really science in the traditional sense.
It's a hypothesis without validation, which leads to the second major failure. The landscape problem.
Okay.
String theory didn't produce one unified solution. It produced an estimated 10 to the power of 500 different possible universes, all mathematically valid.
10 to the... Wait, that's a 1 with 500 zeros?
If your theory of everything predicts 10 to the 500 different things, It fundamentally predicts nothing.
It's useless.
It requires external input. It requires reductionism to look outside itself, to pick which solution describes our reality. It fails its own test.
So after 100 years of the deepest intellectual reduction, the physicist looking for the unifying particle just found more math and a staggering number of possible universes, none of which explicitly demanded that life or, any specific complex structure had to exist in this way.
The expectation was that by looking deeper, things would get simpler.
Right.
Instead, the deeper they looked, the more complex, mathematically abstract, and less empirically relevant the answers became. It just reinforced the notion that the secrets of life aren't hidden within the atom. They're created by the arrangements of atoms at scales that reductionist physics just chose to ignore. The atoms themselves gave up no secrets about agency or consciousness.
So, reductionism has failed its ultimate mandate, especially when it's confronted with life. If smashing things up doesn't work, what's the alternative that's causing so much intellectual commotion right now?
This is the rise of complexity science.
Which I am affectionately calling the vibes theory.
It's the theory that says the whole matters more than the parts, and it is absolutely foundational to this shift. This new paradigm began gaining real traction among researchers across various fields, biology, computer science, some physicists, since the 1980s, really.
And why then?
It was driven by the need for new mathematical tools to study systems that are inherently messy and nonlinear.
And this field, complexity, it's based on a concept that sounds, suspiciously like generalized philosophy to a reductionist ear: emergence.
The core concept is precisely that. Systems in which the whole is far more than the sum of its parts. The connections, the interactions, the feedback loops between components create new properties, new behaviors, even new laws that simply did not exist in the isolated components.
Okay, let me put on my skeptical host hat for a second. This is where I start to feel a little bit gaslit by science. Are you telling me that if you put enough dead, simple atoms together, they just magically become alive or conscious? Where is the scientific rigor in saying stuff happens when there's enough stuff?
That is the initial reaction of the reductionist who views emergence as either magic or just a cover for incomplete understanding. But the counter-argument, the core philosophical break, was concisely framed by the physicist Philip W. Anderson way back in 1972.
And what did he say?
He said, "More is different."
More is different.
Yeah.
Why is that four-word phrase so revolutionary?
Anderson argued that the ability to reduce, say, chemistry to physics or solid-state physics to particle physics does not imply that the new laws of chemistry or solid-state physics are merely complicated particle mechanics. They are fundamentally new.
Okay, give me a concrete example of a new law.
Sure, think about the concept of temperature. Temperature is a macroscopic emergent property. You cannot assign a temperature to a single atom. You need a large collection of atoms interacting for that property to even exist. Furthermore, the laws of thermodynamics, like the irreversible flow of heat, are completely new laws that govern the collective behavior.
Right.
They do not exist in the equations for a single electron.
So the laws of thermodynamics are just as fundamental as the laws of quantum mechanics. Even though thermodynamics only applies to large collections of particles, it's operating on a different emergent level of reality.
Exactly. When you go from one atom to a billion, the collective interaction introduces broken symmetries and organizational principles that create new rules. The laws of particle physics are necessary, but they are not sufficient to explain the new reality. More matter, arranged in a specific way, creates different physics. That is the manifesto of the anti-reductionist camp.
A whole new level of the game unlocks.
And the reductionist manifesto was all about prediction from the bottom up. Knowing the initial state of the components lets you predict the final state of the whole. Complexity recognizes that this fails miserably when strong emergence occurs.
Okay, let's define that difference. What's the difference between weak and strong emergence?
Okay, so weak emergence is what a supercomputer can handle. It's complex, like weather patterns or turbulence, but it's still fundamentally traceable and predictable from the components if you have enough computational power.
Right.
Strong emergence, however, refers to phenomena like consciousness or life, where the resulting properties appear genuinely novel and cannot be fully deduced or predicted, even in principle, from the knowledge of the components alone.
So if I could build a model of 1,000 interacting particles and predict their complex behavior, that's weak emergence.
Yes.
But if I can build a model of 1,000 atoms and it spontaneously starts writing poetry, that's strong emergence.
That's the core distinction. Complexity science suggests that once systems scale up and start feeding back upon themselves, creating these recursive loops, they become nonlinear and produce genuinely unpredictable novelty.
They're not just complicated, they're different.
And this isn't just, philosophical hand-waving. This intellectual shift has been validated by the scientific establishment.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Recall the 2021 Nobel Prize in Physics. It was awarded to researchers in complex systems, specifically for their work in modeling physical systems like Earth's climate.
I remember that.
That prize demonstrated that the study of massive, nonlinear, unpredictable systems is now considered fundamental physics, on par with string theory or particle accelerators.
So 2 Nobels in 3 years, 2021 for complexity, for climate and patterns, and 2024 for the result of complexity, AI confirming that the old guard is wrong. Physics is officially looking outside the atom for fundamental truth. It's redefining what fundamental even means, shifting the focus from the simple stuff to the essential rules governing organization.
To bring this idea of emergent patterns to life, let's revisit that analogy from the source material. The difference between noise and art, or sound and music.
The choir analogy, I love this.
Okay, so a reductionist physicist approaches a room full of singers. What do they see?
50 individual vibrating atoms making 50 individual sound waves.
Right. They can analyze the amplitude and frequency of each wave perfectly. They are focused on the mechanics of the vibration.
But if one person screams in the street, we call that a problem. It's noise. It's disorganized.
The sum of the parts is just a greater volume of noise.
But now, if those 50 people coordinate their efforts, following a complex musical score, adhering to rules of rhythm, harmony, and counterpoint, well, 50 guys screaming harmoniously is not just louder noise.
It's a choir. It's art.
The new level of reality, the cultural and emotional impact of the music, it emerges entirely from the coordination and the interaction, not from the material components. The reductionist physicist, still focused on the individual vibrating atoms, fundamentally misses the entire mechanism of coordination.
And this coordination introduces new emergent laws. The laws of harmony and counterpoint, the required spacing between notes, the structure of a fugue. These are rules that are just as real as the law of gravity, but they operate entirely on the level of the collective system, the pattern.
And it's self-referential, right? The individual singer adjusts their vibration, their atomic output, based on feedback from the sound of the entire choir.
The whole guides the parts, which in turn sustain the whole.
And that's what complexity focuses on, the functional pattern and its recursive feedback loops.
Yeah.
And that functional pattern is what defines life.
Which brings us to life itself, the ultimate, most frustrating paradox for the classical physicist, because it just utterly defies the expectation that fundamental objects should be simple, static, and predictable.
Right.
From a purely material standpoint, a living thing is just a collection of atoms, so it should behave like a rock or a star. If you know the particles, you should know the object. But life is special because it exists far from thermodynamic equilibrium.
Okay, we need to spend some time on this. What does far from equilibrium actually mean? And why does it break reductionist physics?
Classical physics, especially classical thermodynamics, is excellent at modeling systems in equilibrium. Systems that are stable, static, or just predictably degrading, like a cooling cup of coffee or a dying star.
Things settling down.
Exactly. These systems tend toward maximum entropy, toward disorder. A rock is basically in equilibrium.
If I come back to a rock in 1 billion years, I can predict its approximate state based on physical weathering. The atoms are the same, just slightly rearranged.
But life is a system that actively, constantly works to maintain its organized pattern against that universal tendency toward disorder. And this requires a continuous, sustained flow of energy and material.
So it's fighting against the current of the universe.
All the time. The source material uses a powerful, simple example. Your own body. The atoms that constitute your body today will not be the same atoms in a year. You are constantly replacing, assimilating, and excreting matter.
Wait, okay. If the matter is constantly changing, then I'm not a thing made of matter in the same way a rock is.
Exactly.
I am something else entirely.
You are. Life is not an inert object. It is a dynamic pattern playing out over time, sustained by dissipating energy into the environment. You are less like a statue and more like a complicated, self-sustaining whirlpool.
A whirlpool.
The water that makes up the whirlpool is constantly changing, but the whirlpool itself, the pattern persists. And it has physical effects on its surroundings.
So the challenge for physics is modeling that pattern maintenance. The pattern is the fundamental thing, even though the particles underlying it are transient.
Which means the object of study is no longer matter, but organization and flow.
And this is what they call dissipative structures.
Yes, structures that maintain their organization by constantly dissipating energy heat, waste into their environment. The reductionist mind wants to find the stable component, but the reality of life is that stability only comes through continuous dynamic instability, through constant work.
This self-maintenance leads directly to the next paradox, right? The self-organizing loop, the ultimate physics chicken and egg problem.
It fundamentally defies linear mechanical explanation.
When we talk about a machine, we assume a linear process. An external source builds the machine operates, and then it's maintained by some separate external process. Life isn't like that.
Not at all. Living systems both create and maintain themselves in this strange recursive loop. They're self-referential. Let's use the example from the source. The cell membrane. It defines the very boundary of life itself.
The membrane is the fence. It keeps the inside distinct from the outside, allowing all the necessary chemical gradients and keeping harmful stuff out. It's essential for the cell's survival.
But here's the critical loop. The cell cannot exist without the membrane.
Right.
Yet the components of the membrane, the lipids, the proteins, are built and continually replaced by the internal processes of the cell itself. The cell has to expend energy and use its complex internal machinery to create the boundary that defines it.
So the structure, the membrane, enables the process, the metabolism.
And that process enables the creation of the structure.
It's a closed, mutually supportive feedback system. You can't logically pull the cause and effect apart into a simple sequence.
And this recursive nature completely breaks the reductionist dream of explicit prediction. If you can't separate cause from effect, if the components are required to generate the very context that allows those components to function, then the system is fundamentally autonomous and irreducible.
The cell is the factory that builds and maintains the fence that keeps the factory running.
And no existing machine built by human hands can replicate this closed, self-generating autonomy. It means that the living entity is defined by the continuity of its activity, not the stability of its physical part.
And this self-organization introduces fundamental unpredictability.
Which is the clearest sign that reductionism is fundamentally broken when you apply it to evolution and life's historical trajectory.
The reductionist physicist can still do amazing things with prediction, though, right? They can look at massive non-living systems and tell us the future with incredible accuracy.
Oh, absolutely. If I give a physicist a young star, they can apply fundamental laws of gravity, fusion, and hydrodynamics to predict its future with high certainty.
When it will run out of fuel, whether it will become a white dwarf or collapse into a black hole.
It's deterministic and predictable from the bottom up.
But apply that same methodology to the origin of life.
If you give that same reductionist physicist a simple, self-replicating cell from 4 billion years ago and ask them to use the laws of particle physics and chemistry to predict its future, they would be completely stumped.
They could calculate how the carbon atoms would bond, how energy would flow, sure.
Yeah.
But they could never predict the specific forms the system would eventually take.
Never. They could never predict that this simple microbial soup would eventually lead to the invention of the nervous system or agriculture or our ultimate absurd example from the source material. That 4 billion years later, this pattern would evolve into a giant rabbit that can punch you in the face.
Kangaroos. The ultimate unpredictable emergent consequence. A punching rabbit.
The evolution of the kangaroo, the human, the complex ecosystem, these are all highly contingent historical events that are unpredictable from the simple components. Emergence means life is this runaway process of innovation, continually creating new levels of structure and new constraints that the basic atomic laws just do not dictate.
So physics can predict the death of a star with certainty, but it couldn't predict the invention of the boomerang.
And that is the true measure of reductionism's failure in the face of life.
If the physics of life is truly fundamental, it has to account for life's most profound and baffling property, which reductionist physics ignores entirely.
Agency.
Agency, meaning goal-directed behavior, purpose, or what we might call an autonomous itch.
I like that, an itch.
Life is the only known system in the universe that fundamentally uses information for its own purposes towards self-maintenance and propagation. Everything else in the universe, a river flowing, a rock rolling, a star shining, it's all passively following pre-existing force gradients. They're determined by external laws.
But living systems actively direct themselves. We see this agency everywhere, even in the simplest forms. Microbes don't just drift, they swim towards specific chemical concentrations that signal food.
Plants don't just grow. They actively modulate their cellular structure to maximize light intake.
This sounds like philosophy, not physics. How does complexity science translate purpose into rigorous mathematics?
That's the question.
The new physics of life looks at this through the lens of information theory and thermodynamics. Life doesn't just process energy, it processes information to reduce its own uncertainty about its future survival. This is sometimes called active inference or self-generated goals. The purpose is rooted in the physical requirement of self-maintenance far from equilibrium.
Okay, let's contrast this with a machine, because this is where the AI debate gets messy. A robot is often goal-seeking. It searches for a wall plug when its battery is low. That looks like agency.
It looks like agency, but it's extrinsic and programmed. A living human programmer who possesses genuine autonomous goals must hard-code that need into the machine. The robot follows instructions created elsewhere. The information it uses is given to it.
But life is different.
Life, by contrast, is both agential and autonomous. The goal survival, replication, is internal to its organization. The information it processes is that a predator, is this food, is used to sustain its own intrinsic, non-coded needs. It has its own self-generated itches to scratch.
That difference is everything.
Intrinsic purpose driven by the physical requirements of continuous existence versus extrinsic programming. That's the final and most robust feature that reductionist physics cannot explain. It confirms that life is a fundamentally different class of physical system than any non-living structure we have yet encountered.
Okay, so we've established a deep philosophical and physical break, but we're recording this in December 2025. Why is this abstract physics discussion urgent right now? Why does the collapse of reductionism matter to the average person dealing with the current technological landscape?
Because the shift is being driven by the colossal and immediate impact of artificial intelligence, specifically the evolution of the general clevernesses models.
Right.
These systems are so sophisticated, so complex, that they are forcing the ultimate existential question. Are we just complicated machines too?
The rise of these AI models makes the argument about complexity and emergence immediate, not academic. When a large language model can generate novel scientific hypotheses or create art that moves us, the lines between simulation and genuine intelligence they blur.
We need a fundamental definition of life and intelligence to categorize the technology we are building.
Absolutely.
The necessity of this new physics of life is paramount. If we want to properly assess claims about whether AI models might achieve true general artificial intelligence, GAI, or consciousness, we must have a scientific, physical, and mathematical understanding of the one thing we know possesses general intelligence.
The old physics only gives us atoms and algorithms. It says, the code is complex, but it's still just instructions running on silicon. The new physics has to give us a theory of being.
And if we lack the ability to articulate what makes a self-organized, information-driven, autonomous living thing fundamentally different from an inert machine, then the debate over AI consciousness is just doomed to remain pure philosophy.
Right.
This new physics seeks to provide the objective, measurable metrics for life and agency. This is why that 2024 Nobel was such a profound signal. It directed the entire field to solve the GAI problem by solving the life problem first.
So to succeed, physicists need to do something highly unnatural for their culture.
They must abandon the purely bottom-up approach. Their talent for starting with simple parts and building up the complexity is insufficient because of strong emergence.
The toddler method, smashing the vase, it just doesn't work when you're trying to understand a complex pattern like a brain. You can't predict the properties of the whole by summing the properties of the parts.
But they don't have to throw away their expertise entirely. The new path is about repurposing their core skill. Physics' ultimate strength is its ability to capture the essential aspects of any system and cast those essentials in the precise mathematical language of constraints, flow, and organization.
So instead of asking, what are the quantum states of the atoms in this cell membrane, they're asking different questions.
Questions that target the functional requirements of life.
Like what?
Like, what is the minimum requirement for a structure to maintain itself far from equilibrium? Or how must information be organized and utilized to ensure the system is autonomous? Or what's the required flow of useful energy through a system to sustain recursive self-maintenance?
They're looking for the functional laws of life, written in math.
And this approach offers the massive potential payoff of defining the limits of silicon.
Okay.
Understanding life at this fundamental organizational level may reveal that there are thermodynamic or informational requirements for true autonomous intelligence that a static, programmed input-output silicon chip system fundamentally cannot meet. So maybe true life, true agency, requires wetware. Systems that are constantly swapping atoms, constantly flowing energy, constantly engaging in that self-maintaining loop.
It's possible. The new physics might prove that you can create a brilliant simulation of intelligence in silicon, but not a true self-aware autonomous life.
It shifts the debate from merely computational power to organizational quality.
Exactly. It moves the conversation from how many transistors an AI has to how much genuine autonomy its structure allows.
Which, naturally, brings us to the ultimate 2025 philosophical question forced by this debate. If the universe is just a computer, is God the programmer who wrote the code, or is he the IT guy who forgot to update the firewall, allowing the spontaneous emergent virus of life to take hold?
And the most exciting result of this paradigm shift is the forced restructuring of the scientific hierarchy. For the first time in centuries, physics cannot stand alone. The study of life is going to require fundamental, sustained, and respectful cooperation. Physics has been humbled. It must now acknowledge that the gooey sciences, biology, chemistry, even neuroscience, actually hold the essential data and observations about emergent, complex systems.
This creates a path that, for once, unfolds on a genuine level playing field. Biologists understand the specifics of the self-maintaining cell. Ecologists understand the complex rules governing massive emergent systems. Neuroscientists understand the information organization in the brain. And physics provides the mathematical language to synthesize those organizational rules into universal principles.
It's the ultimate disciplinary mashup. If you want to understand life, you have to talk to the people who study the micropatterns of RNA and the people who study the macropatterns of human society.
Because both are complex, emergent, self-organizing systems governed by pattern.
And this has huge practical applications.
Massive ones, especially in the search for alien life. If we abandon the reductionist focus on specific chemical recipes, like carbon and liquid water, and instead start searching for life based on its organizational and informational patterns, we can look for true biosignatures in places bearing no resemblance to Earth.
So if the fundamental physical property of life is to be an autonomous, self-maintaining system that grabs information and uses it for its own purposes to scratch its own itch,
then that's a universal signature we can search for, regardless of whether that life is made of silicone or nitrogen or something entirely alien. It becomes a mathematical and organizational search, not a chemical one.
Okay. We have survived the collapse of classical certainties. We've watched reductionism fail its final exam, and we've witnessed the rise of the radical emergent vibes theory. Now, for you, the listener, comes the verdict. We offer you two clear paths, two pills, based on which philosophical camp you choose to reside in.
Your choice reflects how you view your own fundamental existence in the universe.
Option A, the reductionist pill. You take this and you accept the ultimate material truth. You are merely a complicated, yet ultimately predictable, meat machine. Nothing fundamentally matters beyond the predictable linear interactions of particles obeying ancient simple laws. Your consciousness is just an illusion of extreme complication. You are temporary, you are predictable, and your choices were the inevitable, deterministic result of prior physical conditions. Congratulations. Now go back to work.
And then there's the more revolutionary alternative.
Option B, the complexity pill. You take this and you accept that you are a magical, unpredictable, emergent property of the universe. Your existence proves that the universe can organize itself in ways that fundamentally defy its own simplest rules. You are not reducible to your components. You are a pattern of information that autonomously generates its own purpose. You are the universe's greatest surprise party. Therefore, you are special, fundamentally different from a rock, and you should buy our merch.
Regardless of which pill offers more comfort, the scientific reality is that the pursuit of fundamental answers about life is forcing physics and science as a whole to embrace contingency, history, and radical interdisciplinary work.
It's the ultimate pivot, from certainty to surprise.
The shift from predicting the highly deterministic death of a star, a system governed by simple, massive forces, to trying to predict the contingent, emergent future of a self-organized, autonomous system like life, suggests something truly profound about the nature of reality.
Mhm.
It suggests that some things in the universe might be fundamentally unknowable from the bottom up. We may only understand life and consciousness by studying it at its own level of complexity, accepting that the simple particles will never, ever reveal the whole story.
The universe is not a clockwork mechanism waiting to be solved. It's an evolutionary engine of surprises, and we are the greatest, most unpredictable output it has yet generated. This has been The Deep Dive. Keep your atoms together, folks.
It's the only thing stopping you from becoming physics.